Hello and welcome to B2B Revenue Leaders. I'm your host, Dustin, and today I'm joined by Shannon Howard, who is the Director of Customer and Content Marketing at Intellum. And we're talking about all things customer education, from how to map out your content based on business outcomes, how to create the content, how to distribute it, how to measure it, the whole gamut on customer education. On to the episode. Hey, Shannon, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dustin. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. We're going to be talking about customer education. Haven't had a guest talk about this. Admittedly, I don't know a lot and I've probably made a lot of mistakes in this area trying to do customer education. So let's start there maybe before we dive into what to do. Where do you think people actually go wrong when it comes to customer education and how they think about it?
Ooh, that's a good question. Would it be helpful to start with, what is customer education? And then I think that kind of leads naturally into where we tend to get it wrong.
Yep, for
I
sure.
think customer education is how we educate our customers. And I would extend our definition of customer to prospective customer in addition to a paying customer or even a former customer, right? Because our former customers could be advocates, and helping them understand how to use your product and service, but not just, and this is where we get into the mistake, a lot of companies start with, and it makes sense, right? How to actually use it, right? So whether it's technical documentation, help articles, a training, onboarding, right? These are all how to use the product, very tactical.
Yep.
Where I think we often miss out is teaching people how to do their job well using our product, right? Because that's where the value is. It's not that I use a product and that's inherently valuable. It's I use the product to do a job so that my job is better somehow, right? So take, for example, Testimonial Hero. I had to learn how to work with your team, how to submit things on the vendor portal so that you all can do a much better job producing this video than I ever could, right? So how do I help people look good, do their job well?
Nice. Yeah, though that's a good background. I think, like you said, the technical side and the support documentation, you need that, of course,
Yeah.
but it's not incredibly engaging or proactive. Like I find it's a little reactive. So I'm curious there, and we'll jump back to like where to start, how to plan the content and everything. But the place I always get stuck on is how do you actually get people your customers to be involved in customer education, to actually want to get educated and consume the content?
Sure. I think getting them engaged starts with understanding why they want to learn, right? So when I managed an education product, I just went and talked to customers and I didn't ask them, what would make you want to come to our learning platform? I just talked to them and said, hey, what was the last thing that you learned? And what made you want to learn that? And when you decided that you needed to learn something, or when you realized that you needed to learn something to do your job better, what did you do? Where did you go? What did you, most people Google search. So what did you search for? And thinking about those things, right? And that helps you figure out what kind of content to create, and what level maybe to even create it at. Are they asking a very basic high level question, which might say, okay, we need to zoom out a little bit from the product and talk more about this thing or this industry, how to do whatever, and then how to use our product to actually help them do that. So I think really listening to them and talking to them helps us create better content that actually meets their needs. The other thing I think is actually marketing your education content. So I think of education as a product, right? In the same way that you would go to market with a product, that you would continually market and promote your products and services. You want to be marketing your education content so that people know it exists and where to find it.
Yeah, I think that there's kind of like this customer flywheel, whether it's through customer education, in our case, customer testimonials, but just having, as simple as it sounds, having happy customers, gets you more happy customers and the flywheel continues. So on the customer education side, then I'm curious, do you pull in customers into your customer education? I said customer a bunch there, but I think you know where I'm going here.
Actually including them in the content?
Yeah, exactly. And working with them to actually create the content.
Yeah, I think some customer education teams do that. I'll say, I don't think they all do, but I think it's a great use case, right? If you're partnering with your customers to create this content, you're actually maybe creating a little case study or a scenario, right? So, we're marketers. We've probably all been in HubSpot Academy. They co-create content with their customers and with their partners. And so you'll see little case studies of customers in their content that helps you take a concept and look at it in practice, in reality. I think you can also, in the same way, right? You'd have a product advisory council or some kind of product advisory board. You can also have a content advisory board. You can have customers who are reviewing content and saying, I don't know that I understand that. Maybe you could add something here. So you could co-create with customers that way as well. Make sure that you're getting real feedback from real customers as you're building instead of waiting. I think a lot of people, and it's not necessarily wrong to do that, right? And you launch something, you're getting feedback, you're constantly iterating. So that's not necessarily a wrong way to do it, but you can include them in the process, which would probably make sure that what you're shipping is more impactful.
Yeah, I think so. A few times now you've mentioned kind of feedback, talk to the customers, almost customer research, which does make sense because like I've worked at software companies where we
Mhm.
think this one feature or this one thing is really cool, and then no one actually cares about it.
No.
When we talk to them, you kind of get caught up, right? Like this is our baby, we built it, and then you kind of lose what you're looking for. So you kind of mentioned that. You mentioned or kind of hinted around, I think, like focusing on the outcome and how to help
Mhm.
people do better at their job. So
Mhm.
once you collect all this data, you've had the customer conversations, it seems like it could be a lot to organize where to start, how am I going to map out the content, keep it organized, and actually come up with a plan. So maybe a
Mhm.
big question, but I'm curious how you tackle that part, which seems like, the building blocks essentially.
Sure. Yeah. So when it comes to actually mapping this out, there's probably a lot of different ways that you can do it, right? Content marketing, great example, right? I
Yeah.
think even for content marketing for me, there's endless things that I could write and create. Sometimes I get overwhelmed with the possibilities and I want to create it all, right? But the reality is I can't do it all and I can't do it all today. So I have to look at, well, what's going to actually move the needle? What's going to be most helpful and impactful? So I think you can look at that from either an impact perspective, how many customers does this impact? How many people are actually going to use this piece of education content or this training? What problem does this solve for the business, right? So your internal stakeholders can help you prioritize the content that needs to be created to solve a problem for the business, whether it's in onboarding or customers not adopting part of the platform. And then when you're actually creating the content, something that I'd like to keep in mind, and I got my start in education as a curriculum developer for an online school. So that's a long process to create
Yeah.
curriculum. And so, you have this multi-month, almost year-long process of creating content before you can sell it. Right. And so that's not awesome. Right. And especially you're mentioning in software companies, SaaS companies, we need to be quick to get things out the door. Speed to market is really important. So we need to be shipping regularly materials, whether it's a product or in our case, education content. So finding a way to kind of chunk it down. So if we look at, okay, what are all the things that people need to know? Maybe I am putting out, let's say, a certification, right? A lot of companies want to create a certification. You don't have to wait till everything in the certification is buttoned up and like ship that. You can ship in increments, right? So my co-product manager and I on this education product, we would ship certifications in chunks. So we would break it down into courses and lessons, and then we'd ship and then let people know as new things would come out and that they were working toward a certification before we had the whole thing ready to go. So I think that's one way to kind of like organize your thoughts in terms of where to get started. I would look at impact, business impact for sure. And then organizing it, looking at, how can I sequence these things? And it doesn't always have to be done. So really chunking it down and not worrying about creating a large piece of content, but creating smaller pieces of content that you can ship regularly.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because me, like, someone not as experienced in this area, and we're hoping to do a better job with this internally, actually, and educate our customers because I think it is a key, not even a marketing play, it's just a key thing to make happy customers.
Sure.
I go to HubSpot Academy as well, and that's the first thought that comes into my head because it is massive and, it's been
Hmm.
there for 10 years. So then you think, how am I going to do something
Hmm.
like this, just the sheer volume? Their marketing team's probably 20 times the size of our company, right? So like,
That's a most of our teams.
yeah, so it's where do I start? How do I get going? So I like that idea of starting in small chunks. So the question after that is you're pushing out this content, building towards something. How do you actually measure if it's working? And
Hmm.
like, yeah, what you should focus on after that.
Hmm. So there's different levels of metrics, right, that you can measure. Same with regular content, right? So you
Yeah.
have, let's say, page views, time on page, bounce rate, things like that you measure for content that tells you, is this content doing its job? Are people finding it useful and interesting? Then you have kind of more of those down funnel metrics, conversions, leads generated, how that influenced opportunities or close one revenue, right? So you have those different levels of metrics. It's the same with education metrics. You have metrics that are saying, is this content interesting and helpful, which could be some of those same time on page and bounce rate, things like that. But it can also be self-reported metrics on a scale of 1 to 5. How effective was this? How impactful was this training? How would you rate this session? Right. So you have those types of metrics. But where we want to get to is those business impact metrics. And this is, again, where I think a lot of people struggle and either don't do it well or don't know how to do it, is we need to always be working back from those business goals. So if our goal is to increase customer satisfaction or increase customer retention or to increase product adoption, which we believe will lead to either customer retention or customer expansion, then we need to kind of track that down to our own metrics. And let's say it's product adoption, right? I see a lot of people doing this now, which is awesome, is they're looking at cohorts of customers who have completed their training or engaged with their education content. And then they're looking at product adoption metrics. And they're saying, okay, we did a training around X part of the platform. And for customers who are trained versus untrained, we see this difference in how they're using that. Or we see that, within 3 days of completing this training, customers are X more likely to adopt this part of the platform, right? So we're looking at, is this actually moving the needle? And that's something I think is really important from an education perspective is the difference between marketing content, education content. Education is supposed to lead to behavior change. It's supposed to actually make you do something differently. And so we want to actually measure, is that happening? And so that's where I think we're looking at these different types of measures. I don't think it's wrong to look at those page views, time on page, those content effectiveness, but we want to actually look at efficacy. Is this actually doing what we thought it would do and changing the behavior we thought it would change?
I see. It's interesting to be thinking through, there's kind of parallel there to like demand gen marketing as well, right? Like you can measure the top level stuff that's happening. So in your case here, time on page, etc. But there is never going to be this direct person viewed education or person viewed some demand gen campaign and then bought or became a product expert, right? Like you need to measure the correlation part there. I wish it was easier because, as marketers, we always get the ROI question from non-marketers and we have to try to explain and tell them that story. But one thing I want to drill in on a bit that you mentioned is measuring product adoption, how they're using the product. I would imagine then, and maybe I'm wrong, that you have to work very closely with the product marketing team then and plan your education strategy around launches or parts of the product that you want to prioritize. So is that the case? And if so, how do you work with them to figure out what to focus on?
So I'd say either product marketing or product management to figure out, what's coming out and what education is useful or helpful. Again, I'll kind of look at, where this tends to go wrong is in the same way that as marketers, we don't want to be told, hey, can you write a blog about X? Can you do an ad about Y?
Yeah.
Right? Please stop asking me to do very specific things. Tell me what you're trying to achieve and I'll help you figure out what's the best way to do that. Right? And we should do the same thing with our education counterparts. As instead of saying, can you go build a help article on this? Can you go build a training on Y? Say, hey, we're releasing this product or feature. These are the questions that we think we're going to be getting from people. What do you think would be helpful in making sure that we're meeting the needs of our customers? Because maybe a training's helpful or relevant or appropriate. Maybe it's not, And so kind of like you were saying earlier, people ship features and parts of product that nobody really cares about. We don't want to create things that people aren't going to find useful, right? So even you said a lot of support content is reactive. I mean, you can be proactive and then end up with a bloated support center because you've created all these help articles that nobody really needed. So, there's pros and cons to both sides of it. But I think for any customer education person, same with any customer marketing person, you should be BFFs with a lot of people in the organization, not just product marketing and product management, but with the marketing team as a whole, even with sales, customer success. You need to be close with those people to understand what their struggles are, what their needs are, what their goals are, and then how what you do can support it.
Yeah, I think aside from customer education, I think marketers could just learn from doing more of that anyways.
Yep.
Like, actually talk to CS, actually talk to sales. They're the ones closest to the customers. Marketers were usually kind of one step removed from them, right? And I think that's why a lot of times it's easy to focus kind of on the high level, almost like theoretical content.
Sure.
rather than the specific business outcome like playbook approach, right?
Mhm.
So we've talked quite a bit about focusing on almost like the product education side of customer education. Is
Mhm.
there another side as well that isn't as product related, but it's
Mhm.
more, let's say you sell to customer marketers. How can I
Mhm.
make customer marketers good at their job and produce content that's going to help them regardless of our product? And if so, how does that kind of fit into that matrix of content?
Sure. Yeah. So that's, I mean, again, HubSpot Academy, we'll just use them because they're a great example, but
Yeah.
they'll start at the top, right? So they taught everybody inbound marketing, right? That's their methodology, that's their bread and butter. And they're starting there and then kind of moving down. So even when they create their content, they're starting very high level. What is it that we're talking about? Why are we talking about it? And then we're
Yeah.
moving down to how do you actually do it? And a subset of that, how is how do you use our product to do it? I do think that this is what the best customer education teams are doing, right? So, one of our customers, Gusto, they're a payroll accounting
Hmm.
software, right? And so they created a series of certifications. One was not just on how to use the product, but it was also how do you do payroll, right? Because you have
Yeah.
people in your organization who are maybe moving into payroll who have never done it before. Then they have a people advisory certification, which is a new offering for their customers to be able to offer people advisory as a service to their customers. So they have these different types of certifications that do include their product, but it's also helping them be better at serving their customers, learn new skills, learn new services that they can offer. And I think you see that with a number of other products too. Like we just implemented Lattice. And so I was checking out Lattice University, and they don't just have how to use Lattice, they also have trainings for managers about setting OKRs and going through performance reviews, things like that, that let's be honest, nobody really taught you. So it's helpful for them to have those in there because if we're going to use Lattice for performance reviews, we should probably all be on the same page about what a performance review is, why we do it, and how to do it well.
Yeah. And I think that like having that type of content makes people better at their job. Like, yeah, they need to learn how to use the product and the specifics and how the features and playbooks, but I think there is something there on just to boil it down overly simplistic, just help people become better at their job and more successful kind of
Hmm.
seems the core of it. One thing I've struggled with before, and I'd love your thoughts here, is kind of like the you can bring a horse to water saying, right? Like you can create all this content and make it
Hmm.
readily available for people. But I've always found there's a subset who's super engaged,
Hmm.
will, dive in, dig into the content. And then there's a huge chunk who just won't. Is
Hmm.
there some, maybe probably not a magic trick, but some way to either like gamify it, make it more interesting just to get more customers actually consuming the content and involved in it?
You could use gamification. There are a lot of different kind of engagement tactics, strategies you can take. I do think it's important with anything to remember there are just people who won't. And
Yeah.
we can bend over backwards and they will just never do it. And so I gave this example to someone who runs Asana's education program. I said, I love you. I love what your team is doing. I have never taken, will probably never take a course in Asana Academy because I don't have the time for it. And it's just not
Yeah.
my number one priority, right? But I've been on teams where there's a marketing project manager who is all about Asana and they're taking all this education and then they're telling me what I need to know to be able to
Hmm.
like they're doing all this education, setting everything up, and then they're coming to me. So that's a form of education too that, we can't track, we can't measure, but kind of like dark social, dark funnel type stuff,
Yeah.
it's happening. And that's great too, right? That our education is empowering, enabling, and equipping our customers to then go teach their teams as well. So that could be happening. I would say I think the most effective tool that we have is partnering with our internal teams. So whoever has that relationship with the customer, usually a customer success manager, those people becoming advocates for your education content and pointing them there, right? And even support people, pointing people to help articles instead of just answering a question, but like saying, hey, you can find this here, you can find this here. And we're training people to go look for those things. But if we keep giving them the answers or,
Yeah.
we just keep picking up the phone, and so really making sure that those people are servicing and highlighting those for customers in their moment of need so that it's not us saying, hey, I know that you have a million things going on and your job isn't just to learn our product. Would you please go take our training though? That would be really helpful for me and my goals. We're teaching internal people that how to champion and advocate for our education programs when the customer actually needs it.
Yeah. That it ties back into being close to the sales team, maybe less sales here, but more like CS, account
Mhm.
management, and really arming them. Like we find that even in what we do, for our customers who want to get testimonials, as a
Mhm.
marketer, you're on an island. You
Mhm.
probably can't ask a customer directly, depending on your role. So
Mhm.
same thing. Like it's just, I think it's just a good lesson in general to marketers. Be friends
Yeah.
with CS for
Be
sure.
friends with so many people in your
Yeah,
company. Honestly,
it
you
makes
should
life easier.
know people. Yeah, everywhere. But going back to metrics too, be friends with your revenue operations people, with your
Yeah,
business intelligence people, with your data analysts, because those are the people who are going to do that correlation analysis that, let's be honest, I'm going to mess up because I'm not very good at numbers. And certainly, as soon as you put them in a spreadsheet, I did something wrong. So, like you need those
yeah,
people. And I think that's a critically underrated skill for marketers, customer education people is you need to proactively build relationships with people and other teams.
yeah. No, 100%. And I think I want to wrap it up with one kind of last question. You like so for listeners, we sent out a kind of a form beforehand
Mhm.
asking for your takes, your thoughts on things, and you mentioned customer education as a marketing strategy. I think we've talked a lot about that already.
Mhm.
But one area we haven't really talked about is kind of how to use your customers to amplify your customer education. So examples here, certifications that then
Mhm.
get shared on LinkedIn or
Yep.
added to the profile. And like, yeah, I'm curious, does that factor in? Like, how are we going to get customers to magnify or amplify our message?
Mhm.
Yeah. And if so, just what role does that play when you're thinking through the content?
Yeah. So I think what you just said is a perfect example of how customer education can benefit marketing teams, right? Is these mentions, this brand awareness online, people are sharing their certification. I think it can also be used on your website when you're talking about this is something I tell people is you don't just sell your product or service. You sell your
Hmm.
customer success team, your support team, your implementation and professional services team, your customer education, right? All of those things provide value to your customer. And let's be honest, too, some people are making decisions to buy a product based on whether or not there is a customer education program and based on
Yeah.
what the help center looks like. If your help center is a mess, if it doesn't have what I need, what I think I'm going to need, I'm not going to go there because I need to be able to self-service those resources. But I think it can even help with helping people make the decision to buy your product, right? In terms of how do we leverage our customers, it's creating advocates, right? Customers who are engaged with us, who are learning from us, better understand our product so they can go talk about it. They're getting better at their job and they're, part of that, they're looking at us and saying, like, this company helped me to be better at my job because they
Hmm.
taught me a skill that I didn't have before, or they offered me a training that I didn't have access to before. Right. So it's building that relationship that they can then go talk about your organization. So whether it is sharing that certification online or it's just in a casual conversation, again, we can't track this, but we know that it's happening. Is that people are saying, you know what, you should check out? You should check out Intellum. You should check out Testimonial Hero. I learned this from them the other day. I just think they're awesome. Right.
Hmm.
So, creating a relationship with people that they'll then go advocate for your product. And not that education makes up for crappy product, but if people no product's perfect, right? It's never gonna be perfectly easy to use. But if you have great education that helps people make the most out of your product, it gives them more of a reason to go talk about your company and go advocate for it.
Yeah, I see that a lot in different Slack groups I'm in, where someone
Mhm.
says, "Hey, I'm trying to learn about X. What's a good resource?"
Mhm.
A lot of times it is the individual at the company, which is a whole nother discussion and play there, right? Like the people first kind of playbook. But yeah, it's something you can't measure. It's essentially
Mhm.
dark social, but from a customer education point of view. So I really like that point. So yeah, we've talked. I think the whole kind of end to end gamut here of customer education. It's actually an initiative for us in 2024. I just hired
Mhm.
someone to focus more on like one to one education first, because I think that's where I'm going to get the ideas of what content I actually want to create
Mhm.
is that person one on one hands on helping customers. So you'll probably see them in the new year. I will probably bug you in the new year to get your thoughts on customer
Please do.
education. But Shannon, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on the show. If
Yeah.
listeners want to learn more about you and Intellum, anything like that, where should they go?
All right. You can find me on LinkedIn, Shannon Howard. It's just definitely the best place to find me right now. Intellum.com. I'm putting out, a lot of great content We're doing monthly webinars and things, again, to help people be better at their job, right? So this
Mhm.
month, we're going to be talking about efficiency, how to be more efficient in your customer education team. So you can do more with less, because as much as we don't want to, we all have to. So yeah, that's where you can find me online.
Awesome. So for listeners, I'll include those in the show notes. And Shannon, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dustin. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to this episode. My key takeaway is just that customer education can be a bit of a beast, and you want to create all the things all at once, which just isn't possible. So it's important to really start with the strategy, figure out why you want to create certain things, and then take like a modular approach to get content out the door quickly. So for us, customer education is a key focus in 2024. I really think it can be a growth driver for most businesses out there, and it's something we're going to focus on a bunch. So if you enjoyed the episode, if you learned something from it, hit subscribe or leave us a review. I really appreciate it. Either way, I'll be back next week with a new episode.